Welcome, everyone. My name's Justin, the ex-Christian presence on this podcast.
I'm Kevin, the devout Christian presence on this podcast.
This is the Tiger and Lamb podcast,
a Christianquisition production.
So this episode is going to kick off a mini-series, so to speak. If you are interested and if you want to be aware of the proper context as we move forward here, we're going to be discussing a documentary. It's a Hulu documentary. It's still available there right now. It's called The Secrets of Hillsong, and it covers some very, very interesting details, the ins and outs, the good and the bad, and the ugly of one of America's most prominent mega corporate churches, if you will. And it's funny because I think most Christians, when you say Hillsong, they immediately think about their worship music, right? Kevin and I were talking before this podcast about some popular songs, and I just wanted to look up a list of famous songs that we can discuss here going into the episode to bring everyone up to speed. And I just want to shout out a user on Reddit here, u/GladCoast6858, for absolutely nailing this top 7 Hillsong list. It's funny because as me and Kevin were reading through the list, we could each sing the tune of each song that came up, and I have not been inside a church in years. But they're so ingrained in Christian culture and that, you know, I heard them at every church that I visited growing up. What about you, Kevin?
I didn't even know they were a church for a long time. I thought they were like, not really like a band, but like a Christian music group, I guess, that just did music. I didn't realize that it came from a church originally.
If I'm being completely honest, I didn't realize that it was a church either until some things started to come out about it. So I remember seeing like some articles shared on Facebook or something like that.
Okay.
But just to give u/GladCoast6858 their proper due here, their list of their top 7 Hillsong songs here: Shout to the Lord, What a Beautiful Name, Mighty to Save, Hosanna, Oceans, Cornerstone, This I Believe. If you are a Christian that has been going to church your whole life, I am willing to bet there's like an 80% chance that you can sing the chorus of at least 4 of those songs off the top of your head.
And we will not be doing that here today, unfortunately.
Yeah, due to potential copyright infringement purposes, you know, we've registered this podcast as something that doesn't have licensed content. So I'm worried that my beautiful singing will mimic their incredible talent too closely, and we'll end up getting this episode removed.
But to your point, I don't think we even need to sing the melody. I think just the words, if you've been to church over the past 10 years at an evangelical church, you probably can finish the line.
For me, the song that comes to mind when I hear Hillsong is Oceans. Bar none, it's Oceans. What about you?
Shout to the Lord, definitely. I can hear it in my head when you say the words. And Oceans, yeah. The top 2 on his list.
Inside Out is another big one that I hear a lot. Anyways, we're going to be talking about the content of the first episode of the documentary. We're going to limit that. Each episode's going to cover each, individual episode there. And this episode covers a few things. One, it covers what I would say is like the rise and fall of their, at one point in time, celebrity head pastor of the planting the church in New York. And then it also covers sort of like the cultural experience that Hillsong was.
What is that experience exactly? Well, when you go to a Hillsong New York service, first of all, like, it's huge. There's a lot of people there. There's people lined up on the sidewalk. So instantly, before you even get inside, you get the sense that this is something big that's going on here.
Yeah.
You get in there and you might find a celebrity. I mean, we have sightings of Kevin Durant, Selena Gomez,
Kylie Jenner.
Yeah, of like A-list celebrity fame. So you probably won't be sitting next to them, let's be honest. But, you might be seeing them in the building.
Oh, yeah, they got a VIP section for sure.
Yeah. Come on. Don't get carried away. But you might see them from afar. But on top of that, you've got this music that is being piped into churches all around the world.
Yeah.
Where you have millions of Christians singing these songs, and this is where it emanates from.
Mm-hmm.
So the music grabs you, the lights are down, but the thing is, it's still church, right? And anybody who's gone to an evangelical church service knows that the bulk of that service is a dude talking in the front. So you gotta keep these people in.
What's so interesting to me about it is it really seems to have almost laid the foundation or been the blueprint for how so many of these non-denominational churches kind of function, right? Like we got to have the incredible music, we got to turn the lights down low, we got to have these, really warm and fuzzy signs everywhere. In this case at Hillsong, it's welcome home, right? Mm-hmm. When I was driving to work or school or whatever, when I was living over near East County in San Diego, I would see Skyline Church would have all of these like catchy taglines, right?
Right.
And if you ever visit Skyline, you'll see that they do very much have like that huge auditorium with like acoustic, like it's designed acoustically so that they can host concerts there. And fun fact, Hillsong actually toured and played at the Skyline.
Oh, funny.
Right. But I think like it's so interesting. You talked about like the fundamentals of creating or curating the experience, and you were sort of getting at Carl Lentz, who sort of takes center stage in the first episode, or at least I would say his rise and fall, like we referenced earlier, takes a pretty huge center stage. And I find him so entertaining, and probably for the wrong reasons. You know what I mean? Mm. There is the segment where he's talking about I was living in this place and there was a drug dealing community to my left and a drug dealing community to my right. And immediately I'm just like, what does that mean? And he's so charismatic that he's got the audience in the palm of his hand. But for me, I'm not sucked into the gravity of this incredible, mm-hmm. I'm not sitting, where you can hear a pin drop and there's 7,000 people around me, right? I'm not sucked into that experience in the same way watching it on the television. Instead, I'm just kind of like, what the heck are you talking about, Carl? Or is it what distinguishes the line between the drug dealing community here and the drug dealing community there?
Yeah.
And I think, but that is part of the experience, is this very, very passionate speaker who can cry on command, according to some higher up faculty or attendees from the time that he was the pastor. And he tells these stories that aren't necessarily rooted in scripture and aren't necessarily rooted in even logic, apparently, but it just gets everyone so amped.
Yeah, it's so interesting just seeing how far his charisma gets him, mm-hmm. and by extension, how far it gets that church. There's nothing really, and to be fair, I have not sat through an entire Carl Lentz message, so
right.
I'm just going off the clips that I observed. There was nothing profound that I got out of his messages. There was no like, oh, I never thought about it that way. Wow, that was really enlightening.
You didn't find you can rest easy at night knowing that God is protecting you from things unseen encouraging?
Well, I think maybe God has protected me from a Carl Lentz sermon. So, yeah, maybe I've experienced that for myself. But I think it says something that it's not even about the substance of what he's saying. It's the way he's saying it. It's the force of it. Mm-hmm. And the whole environment around it. He just really taps into that. And to your point, he has them eating out of the palm of his hand. What they're eating, we're not really sure what it is, but they're excited to eat it. And he just carries it just by sheer power.
Yeah, they called him the hype priest.
The hype
which
priest.
I think is just such a great term for it. Because what is it? It's hype, right? Yeah. It's not really necessarily substance or content. It's hype. Now, I don't want to go too hard in on Carl Lentz here, because I think that at the end of the day, he is literally just a product of the system. He went to Hillsong's college in Australia.
Right.
He had his education there. He was brought up under Brian Houston, the founder, or rather the founder's son, but really the CEO who amplified, turned Hillsong up to 11, right? He was taken under his wing. He was taught, he was seen as like this rising star, and he was thrust into a position of immense responsibility and power. And he was placed there for his speaking talent and not necessarily his leadership talents or, any other gifts. And he's so young. I mean, I think he was in his late 20s. I think he was like 30 by the time it all sort of fell apart. He was so young, and he's thrust into what eventually became a celebrity role, right? You mentioned earlier KD, Selena Gomez, Kylie Jenner, baptizing Justin Bieber in a pro basketball player's bathtub at 2 a.m., right? He's thrust into this spotlight, and he's going on these talk shows, and he's doing all of these promotions for the church, and he becomes effectively the face of this massive, massive movement. And where was his support, right? If there's messages that he's delivering that are lacking sound biblical wisdom, he was literally taught and instructed how to do those things and what to teach on at the college, right?
Yeah.
So I think that so much of where Carl Lentz came into play for this church was he was the talking head, and he was the face, and he was the guy who was going to do damage control, and he was going to market the church, and he was really, really good at not answering questions and allowing the difficult questions about their church to sort of be swept under the rug in his televised interviews. But again, I think that at the end of the day, he was a product of the environment that we intend to criticize, and that the documentary certainly doesn't shed a very positive light on.
Yeah, you have to ask yourself, what was actually his job? Was his job to instruct people in the Christian faith and make sure that they understand the Trinity and justification by faith? Or was it to garner energy and excitement for this church? If his job is to promote the church, A++ in the beginning, and you reference that it's going to fall, but for a while there, he was doing a really great job in getting attention to the point where the news was covering it. His abs got posted somehow online.
It was on a Joe Rogan podcast
Yeah.
of him walking around shirtless with like another celebrity near him, and a very, very deep V where his pants are, which was a little bit peculiar.
Yeah, I don't think there's many pastors in America where people have seen their abs that publicly. So he was a mega pastor. I mean, it got from the point where the excitement was having celebrities to he is the celebrity.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing in how short order he was able to accomplish that.
Well, and he goes on to talk about we don't have room to fail, right? We have to be this perfect example. And he says that like to his family on camera, we don't have any room to fail. We don't have room for these moral failures because the consequences would be catastrophic. And of course, as the documentary shows, he does go on to have a pretty spectacular failure in that he had an affair and he tried to tell this person that he was having sex with on the side. Don't look me up.
Yeah.
Don't look me up.
Yeah, didn't she say that he claimed to be a sports agent at one point? Or something
Yeah,
like that?
so he's living this double life, and I think when I'm watching it, part of it must have been so that he could try and not be Carl Lentz for a few minutes, He's got so much pressure, and I think like one of the major pushes for his maybe even like mental and psychological break there was that the church was expanding at such a rapid pace and so much was being asked of him, right? That they weren't taking time to cultivate their flock, and they weren't taking time to raise up the people within their own ministry to be volunteers or to be, volunteers that aren't burdened by excess labor and not getting enough money to pay the rent in New York City because they're spending so much time working for the church, because it's not a you have to, it's a you get to volunteering for Hillsong Church, apparently, right? I don't think that he was given very much actual moral support. I don't think he was giving very much leadership support. And I think that this young man whose main talent was being a charismatic speaker was also being asked to be the public face of a major movement, and honestly, what sort of turned out to be a corporation.
Yeah. I wonder if even he at some points would wake up and go, what did I get myself into? Because it is fun to go on the talk shows and it's fun to meet a celebrity, but it's still a job. And he is the catalyst for this organization expanding. You don't even know the guy behind him. Nobody knows that guy's name, who's going to come out later in the episode. But it's, as far as people know, Hillsong equals Carl Lentz. So he's got this whole movement that he has to represent. I'm curious if he thought that it would ever get to that point.
Well, and I think that one thing that goes, and by the way, it's Brian Houston, the guy we mentioned a little bit earlier. He's the guy, he's the CEO. He's sort of the one who's pulling all the strings. And it's interesting how much leeway he gave Carl Lentz when things were going well, right? And it's so important to note. I think one of the really interesting stories that one of the prior congregants had discussed, it was a young gay man who had essentially ascended to a point where he was like leading worship at the New York Hillsong Church, where they're like the cornerstone of Christian worship in the Protestant non-denominational churches. And for him to be bringing his boyfriend to church, for him to come to Carl Lentz and say, hey, I'm going to be on this reality TV show. Is it okay? I mean, and he went out of his way to ask, like, hey, is it okay for me to be like, yeah, I'm gay? Yeah. And Carl's all about it. He's all for it. Right. So what broke down in the process of him going to their college, learning under the wing of Brian Houston himself, to get him to the point where he was confidently telling a gay congregant at their church that it's absolutely no problem and the church is totally behind you, only for Brian Houston to catch wind of it and be like, whoa, we got to do some damage control. Carl, you got to get back on the telly.
Yeah. Good use of word. Brian Houston's from Australia, of course.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's how they refer to it. But yeah, it's kind of like the fire alarm form of management. It's like, I'm not going to really interfere until I hear a fire alarm. Yeah. And then I got to go over and say something. So to your point, yeah, he was at this Hillsong school. He is in New York City, which, I mean, there's going to be some gay people that walk into that church. Like, it's not like that's not an issue there. I mean, that's something that when you have conservative, traditional Christian values and you're going into a place like New York City, that's going to come up. Yeah. And the fact that he wasn't really trained on how to address that or what the church believed on it is pretty remarkable. And you feel
it's
for
your
Carl.
head pastor, right? Your head pastor doesn't know what your church's stance on a theological issue is.
Yeah, and then for Houston to just say, oh, well, we don't knowingly have gay people in leadership, and to just kind of not lecture Carl, but from the other side of the world say, no, that's ridiculous. We don't do that. But was there ever a conversation behind closed doors where he sat down with Carl and said, look, let's open up our Bibles and talk about this? I highly doubt that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like the other interesting thing, right? Whether it's Carl's moral failing or the church being shed in a light where they're like, whoa, we don't actually support gay marriage. Are you kidding me? Yeah. We're not about that, right? His response to these issues, it's not that of a shepherd, right? Mm-hmm. Or at least if it is a shepherd, it's the shepherd who's got the stick and he's smacking you in the back of the legs to get you in line, you know, rather than actually coaxing you with dignity and grace, right? He's kind of coming at this from this, again, we keep bringing up this word, but like it's a corporate approach. It's a very like capitalistic expansion mindset. And it's, you know, we have got to get this PR disaster under reins so that we don't make ourselves look bad. And so that our quote unquote shareholders, right? In this case, like there are some pretty significant donors and obviously they make a lot of money selling their music and rights to play their music at churches all across America, right? We got to make sure that we're protecting that action.
True. Yeah. And to your point about it being kind of a corporate church, I think about how growth was their number one priority. And so when you're trying to grow, you want to appeal to as many people as possible, while at the same time, you don't want to alienate your base, which is, like you said, the conservative churches that are using your material. So how do you do that? You just don't bring things up. And if you have to, you'll bring it up. But one of the things that the documentary talked about was this veneer of progressive marketing that they had.
Yeah.
Where Carl wears like holes in his jeans or something, or they have a fog machine or what have you.
I think it was more like he said Black Lives Matter on stage.
Oh, yeah,
right?
that's true. Yeah.
I think it was
That's a big
like,
one.
it's like, one, we're not going to say anything that makes you feel uncomfortable if you are living in a lifestyle that is outside of our values. And two, we are going to sort of use these expressions like Black Lives Matter as a sort of dog whistle to hint, yeah, we're totally down with the progressive cause, while also not actually embodying those positions, right?
Yeah, and that gets to his famous line, which is, we have one stance, which is love, and we have conversations on everything else.
Yet we have a stance on love, we have conversations about everything else.
Yeah. And everybody can agree on love, right? How many people you go up on the street and say, what do you think about love? Oh, I hate that. There might be, I don't know, but there's not many people that are going to be against that.
I personally found it incredibly confusing, and I thought it was hilarious when one of the show hosts says, what does that mean? And he says, exactly what I said. Exactly what it sounds like. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, because when I hear we have a stance on love, I think about the love is love moniker, right?
Yeah.
Where we're saying love is love, and that's supporting, obviously, gay marriage, right? And so when he says we have a stance on love, my thought is, okay, so what is your stance on love then? What's your stance on that kind of love, you know? And there's so many different kinds of love, and the Bible uses
Right.
3 different Koine Greek terms for love, right? And
Right.
so I'm just like, what? You have a stance on love? It's obviously a total non-answer, right? So it's not even worth breaking down, because it's just, you know, hey, let's just say this really quirky thing and get this question over with, rather than actually addressing the issue. But of course, the interesting part comes right after Brian Houston comes and says, we don't have any gay people in our leadership, and this controversy about this gay guy going on this reality show comes out, and all of a sudden, we have a stance on love, we have conversations about everything else, becomes this very hard line. We believe that the Bible is very clear about homosexuality.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to come out at some point to come out, but you have to at some point signal to Christians that, no, we are with you. And so there's this interesting balance that they're trying to do, where they want to appeal to as many people as possible, while at the same time they can say, we're a Bible believing Christian church. And at some point, the Bible talks about this too. You kind of have to make a choice. You can't really have it all. No matter what culture you're in, Christianity is going to offend people at some point if you follow it to its conclusion.
Well, and on another episode, you actually brought up the date metaphor, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about how churches who are not really expressing their positions on things clearly on stage, to the point where their congregants don't know their theology, it's kind of like setting a trap, right? We're not going to address the things that we don't really have good answers for, or that we don't feel is going to be very appealing for you guys. We're going to dress ourselves up really nicely for the first date, and hope that when we do kind of bring these topics up, you're going to be in too deep, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think in this case, that's literally what was happening here. And this is exactly, I mean, it's so great that we have this wonderful example of exactly that happening. We made you think we were something else in order to bring you in. And then when you found out what we really were, you left. And so the net positive of bringing more people in immediately cancels itself out when all those people leave.
Right. Yeah. Because people want honesty at the end of the day. When you go on that 5th or 6th date and you're still not opening up that you have any flaws or any issues or any struggles, the other person starts to wonder, that's a flaw.
Yeah.
You can't admit there's embarrassing things about you or difficult things that might not jive with what I believe. And so then everybody gets turned off by that, because that in and of itself is a flaw, that you won't admit that you have flaws or that you're embarrassed about something and there's something difficult about you. It's going to be a turnoff. And so it is ironic that they were trying to walk this fine line, and then it ended up, you're not going to really keep anybody with that kind of behavior in the long run.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of like if you're going out with somebody who you know really wants kids, and you know you don't want kids, but you really like them. So you keep dating them and you don't tell them, and you kind of let them believe. And then 6 months in or a year in, you kind of break the news to them, and they're like, I would never have dated you in the first place if I knew this. And so then if they stay with you, it's because you trapped them. And if they leave you, it's the most predictable thing ever.
Yeah.
That's not really the kind of belief that I think that churches should be aiming to cultivate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it does make you wonder, like, deep down, what was the objective of Hillsong Church? Was the objective to glorify God and to help people know God better, or was it something else? And
yeah, was it the $100 million of mostly tax-free revenue that they were bringing in?
Yeah, and it's sad too, because you see these interviews with these people that volunteer to put in all these hours because they really believed in it. Because to your point about the emotional attachment, these people felt like, I have a community here. I grew up in a really straight-laced church, and now I come to this place in New York City, and it's reinvigorated my excitement about things related to God. And so for these people, it was very valuable. And then to just not be treated like the church in the end, because we would say that one of the very essential things that a church should do is take care of its people. Any non-Christian could tell you, yes or no, should a church provide food and housing to its own congregants when they can't afford it? Yes, I think everybody would agree that's an expectation. But Hillsong was so growth-oriented that it seemed like all the capital just kept going back into the business side of it, rather than the labor, rather than the people.
It was, we've got a system that saves us so much money because we can tell them it's not a you have to, it's a you get to, and get them to do a ton of free labor for you as volunteers. And they get to the point where, and this is where I was saying like cultivation earlier, right? You've got this problem that you really need to address, and you need to take a moment to stop and think about, hey, what are we going to do about this? But rather than doing that, rather than taking care of their own people with some of that $100 million, what they did was they said, let's keep expanding and keep using the same foundational structure for every church that we open up, right? And so then instead of taking care of these people, you end up compounding the issue. You have way more people who are now volunteers, working insane hours, not getting paid, not seeing any benefit to their work, really. And I guess I want to say this. When I was a Christian, I did lots of very, very free or very, very cheap labor. I worked as an intern for the church that I went to for 2 years, and that involved 20 or more hours per week of work. I worked at a Christian summer camp where I was getting like less than $200 a week for a tremendous amount of work. And I do not regret that at all. I truly, truly believed in what I was doing, and I knew what I was signing up for, and I loved it. So to some extent, I think that I can relate to, hey, we're going to have volunteers. Volunteers are going to be a component of how we operate.
Sure.
But at the same time, there's levels to it. And certainly, I think that many, many people who go through attending leadership groups and dedicating anywhere from 5 to 50 hours of their time for free to churches, I think they get to a point where they maybe feel, man, I really feel like my time wasn't valued as much as maybe it should have been since I'm not getting paid for this, right? But it's especially egregious when, the organizations that I was working for that weren't paying me were very small, right? It was a church of less than 1,000 people, and that's really putting it nicely. And a summer camp that again, it's not like a mega corporation. It's nowhere near what Hillsong is, you know?
Yeah.
And so you can sort of understand like, hey, I'm taking a pay cut here to help the team and to commit myself to something that I think is greater, right? But with Hillsong, it really seems like they took those fundamentals. They said, hey, this is a way for us to get free labor. This is a way for us to have the production value that we have without the cost of the production value that we want to have, right? And let's expand on that. I think it's, again, corporatizing church and focusing on expansion versus taking care of the people that you have. And what was the expansion really for? Was the expansion so that you could lead more people to Christ, or was the expansion so that you could get a wider tithing base?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it reminds me of like the trope from sci-fi movies where they build some kind of crazy robot or something. And what's the quote? Like, we spent all our time asking ourselves how we could do it, and we never asked ourselves whether we should do it, you know? It was almost like there's this self-perpetuating thing, like, yeah, we got to get bigger, 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 bigger. But it's like, why? To what end? Just get big? I mean, what was it all heading towards?
And the ego of Brian Houston to think that he was the mastermind to pull the strings and be behind it all, right? Mm-hmm. And to think that he could pull this off. I think that's so telling, right? He's driving his luxury cars in Australia while Carl is taking a beating on TV for things that he wasn't very well prepped for. And then, you know, it's really, really, really atrocious to see the turn that Brian Houston took against Carl the minute Carl faltered.
Yeah.
Right? When I was watching that, what immediately came to mind, right? So just for the listeners here, I'm specifically talking about after Carl Lentz cheated and was fired and ousted from the church for his moral failures. It's literally what they call it, moral failures. Mm-hmm. Brian Houston goes on TV and goes in an interview and says, I love Carl, but, you know, he had some very narcissistic tendencies.
Yeah.
Why was that necessary?
Yeah.
What I immediately thought of when I saw that, and when I saw this person who had done so much for their church, not just thrown out, but really like trotting upon his grave, I thought of some biblical heroes. I thought about the story of David and Bathsheba. We have David who commits adultery, right? He has sex outside of marriage. He has sex with a woman who's married to somebody else. And he's such a big fan of it that he says, you know what? I'm going to have your husband killed. I'm going to put him on the front lines, and I'm going to have him killed so that I can have you to myself. And we laud David as a biblical hero. And this is something that Christians love to talk about, the story of David and Goliath. They love to talk about King David. They love to talk about him playing the harp. They love to talk about him being a shepherd that became king. But then I don't understand how this story that very, very many Christians do know and realize, and I'm confident comprehend, is so much worse than what Carl did.
Yeah.
I mean, he killed someone.
Yeah. Literally.
And what about Saul of Tarsus, who later becomes the Apostle Paul, murdering dozens upon dozens of Christians? Murdering Christians, right? Paul gets to be the hero that wrote most of the New Testament. David gets to be the hero who wrote some of the Psalms and was a great king. But Carl doesn't get an ounce of forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Fire him. I don't have an issue with that. Whatever.
Right.
Obviously, you got to handle that issue because he knows that he can't be doing that, whatever.
Well, Carl himself said that.
Yeah, but oh my goodness, where was the support? Where was the love? Where was the help? What was the importance of going on television and dragging Carl through the mud because of his mistakes? And the other thing I think about that too is like it's so ironic that he's talking about Carl's narcissistic tendencies like he's not the one who put Carl in charge in the first place.
Right. He had no idea. Yeah, he never sat down with him and said, we really need to get you evaluated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it's the fire alarm form of management. I'm going to just let this machine run until there's an outcry, and then I'll come in and I'll save the day. Like from Houston's perspective, that's what he's doing. And yeah, if Carl is the casualty in the process to keep this machine running, so be it. And so Carl is convenient because you can put, and this is a biblical idea, but the scapegoat, right? You put all the sins onto him, and then you make him go outside the camp. That was what the scapegoat was. And
Yeah.
so that is what Carl's function now is. Whereas before, Carl was the one who was bearing the load on his shoulders. Now he's the one. Yeah, if we just didn't have Carl, this church would be doing great. But it's
Yeah.
because of him that this thing almost got ruined. But don't worry, everybody. He's gone. Now we can keep on plugging ahead.
And it was just an immediate turnover. Just the
Yeah.
moment that Carl
Next.
failed, it was, we got to move on.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, I think that there's so much incredible content in just this episode alone of the documentary that we could really carve out. But the main thing that got me was, again, like, and I'm going to say this over and over and over again, right? The corporatization of church. They revealed that they have tithing goals, and if you reach $50,000 in tithes, you get to have dinner with our CEO.
Yeah.
I mean, with the founder. And the rapid expansion, the concept of damage control. I mean, it's just wild. It's wild to see a church that's got to do damage control rather than express and show grace and really represent the values that they claim and purport of Jesus, right? Of let's be merciful, let's be loving, let's acknowledge that all have sinned and fall short, and let's support each other, and let's, of course, raise up those of us who have struggled and failed so that they can continue forward, right? You also have like their college that they charge 10 to 20 grand a year to go to, the music, they sell merch at their website, and all of this really kind of, to me, it's just like, we're not trying to create converts, we're trying to dominate capital. We're trying to create an empire.
Build a
We're trying to
brand.
expand, and we're trying to be present, and we're trying to be known, and we're trying to find as many ways into your pockets as possible. And again, I don't think that everyone in the church is like that. Of course not.
Mm-hmm.
But the corporate structure and the way that they function is so much more like a company than any church that I've ever been to.
I think it's interesting if you either talk to Christians that have gone to other countries to try to spread Christianity, or Christians who moved to America from other places, or even just outside the Western world, because then you'll hear them talk about, well, you know, when we brought the gospel to this South American country, they had their religion already in place. And so they call it syncretism. They kind of blended their native religion with Christianity, but then it ceases to be Christianity. And I think in America, we could have blind spots. What's our American cultural beliefs?
That's a really, really apt description. That's really great.
And so I think as American Christians, we need to ask ourselves, what's the point at which it's becoming too American and not Christian enough?
Yeah.
And I think Hillsong is a cautionary tale. What happens when capitalism infects Christianity too much? There's some things that we can take from capitalism, but it's not supposed to be on the same plane as Christianity. We're supposed to keep Christ first and put capitalism lower on the list.
Yeah, it's just maybe a little bit lower.
Just a little.
Well, I am really excited for us to discuss episode 2 next week. I'm really excited for the audience to have exposure to that. And again, I really, really highly recommend this documentary. And I want to say that it does have certain biases that I'm not 100% in support of. I think that oftentimes it doesn't really try to reflect the Christian perspective or like a good theological evaluation of what was happening. But it does a really, really, really great job of assessing the situation and finding out where the real poison was in the tree, right? Where did the poison start in the vine, and where did it descend to? So really, really excited to discuss this. Really, really excited to discuss episode 2. And again, highly recommend the Secrets of Hillsong documentary on Hulu.